Yep. Right. We've covered 550 miles on the BSA Gold Star so far, and according to their service schedule, it should have an oil change at 500 miles, but that depends which service manual you read, because they also have an updated download now, which you can obtain through BSA's download site and download it onto your phone or whatever. That changes the running in or breaking in procedure slightly, but it also gives two figures for the first service or first oil change. The oil, it says, should be changed at 1,000 kilometres or 500 miles. Now, if you do the maths and compare those two figures, 1,000 kilometres is 621 miles. So those two figures don't quite tie up. I know most manufacturers round it off, to the nearest sort of 100, but that doesn't really fit in. So I'm a little bit confused as to why that is. And in that respect, I've run the bike for 550 miles before doing the oil change. So we're sitting sort of more or less right in between those two values. I'm going to get on with the oil change. First thing I want to do is just go through the oil check procedure. To do that, I'm going to have to move the camera and get it on where I'm working down here. Just give me a moment. Right, as you've just seen, I've warmed the engine up to check the oil. We've got a dipstick inside this oil tank here. Obviously, this is a dry sump engine, so the oil's actually stored in this tank that goes behind the left-hand side panel. I mean, I've run one or two Rotax engines in the past. I'm pretty sure this is the first dry sump Rotax I've owned, because I don't remember my BMW 650 and 800. Certainly the 800 was a wet sump, I know that for certain, but I don't remember my old 650 being a dry sump, but maybe it's just my memory. Right, as you can see, the oil is very clean, so nothing really to worry about here. Pretty much as you would see with the Royal Enfields, although with the Royal Enfields you generally change the oil at 300 miles, so they won't have done as much mileage as this engine has done before you come to your first change. So we're just going to check the oil level with the dipstick. Now, what you do, and I'm divining this from BSA's instructions because they're not actually that clear, but it does talk about at the end of the procedure screwing your dipstick and cap back in. So with most of these sort of dipsticks, this is how you check your oil level. You sort of rest it on the lip, but you don't screw it in. So we're going to take a reading now and see where we are. And you're probably not going to be able to see this. I'll have to get it right way around. But it's bang on the maximum mark, which is where it was when I got the bike. So we're also pretty sure here that it's not burning any oil. So all good so far. Now, the oil change procedure on this bike is a little bit different from a wet sump. We need to empty this tank as well as drain oil from the the sump underneath, because there will be some residual oil under there. So I'm going to leave this off so that air can get in there. The actual drain plug is under here. Now, it tells you in the manual to get the bike upright on a paddock stand. I think you're just going to cause yourself a lot of cleanup work if you do that, because where this is sighted, it's going to drip all over the frame and behind the frame if the bike is upright. So what I'm going to do, I've actually got it on a piece of wood at the moment to get it a little bit further upright. I'm going to remove that piece of wood before I drop the oil out of here. That way, hopefully, most of that oil is going to miss the frame. The danger with that, all right, it's no major hassle, but if you get oil dripping all behind the frame and that way you can't get at it, later on you're going to have drips of oil coming down. It's going to make you worry or wonder whether you've got an oil leak somewhere. So it's best to delete any opportunity for that to happen, to save you peace of mind later on. Right, so I've put the bike just on its side stand. I've taken the piece of wood out, which tips the bike over a little bit more this way. So what I'm hoping is, I'm going to have some, what I will do actually is just shove, oh, went a bit too far. Just shove a bit of that in there just to soak up any drips that do go that way. This is a 14mm drain plug. Right, get that on tight. There we go. Now there is a sealing washer on this, which I think is aluminium. I'll show you the kit that I'm using in a moment. Now if you just put upward pressure on your thumb, on it with your finger, as you screw that off until you feel the thread disconnect. I have started the engine up, by the way, and got the oil warmed up so that it flows out freely. That also gets any particles up in suspension. And there we go. And we'll just let that drain out. Yeah, it's not too bad. It's sooted up a little bit, but it's not bad at all. I would say that's about on par with what we get out of the Royal Enfields. This is a magnetic drain plug. If you just look on the end here, we do have some metallic sludge. That's normal, what we're looking for. We don't want any big chunks or shards of metal. Obviously, this is why you put the bike through its running in procedure, is to get these bits worn off the engine early on. I mean, that's quite normal. It's not bad at all. Can't see anything there to worry about. Now I've got a complete replacement filter, obviously oil because we're dropping the oil out, and replacement washers. BSA say you can reuse these washers twice. I prefer not to, if I can help it. So I've got replacements for those, and I'll show you that kit in a few minutes once we've got all the oil drained out of this bike. Now I'm going to leave that for a while, 10 minutes or so, and then I'll come back because it's just starting to rain. Now the engine drain bolt is massive. 24mm. I don't think I've come across one quite as large as that, except maybe on a truck. So we need to... I'm going to need an extension on that because it's not quite clear. It's right next to the rectifier, which does make getting at it a little bit difficult. So I'm going to use a short extension bar just to give me a little bit more clearance. Just get it loosened off and then... Right, I have absolutely no idea why, but at this point my microphone switched off for some reason. I did have a little bit of trouble slackening this particular sump plug off. Now, it's made of quite a soft aluminium, and obviously the engine block is aluminium. The reason that the manufacturers have made the plug from a soft aluminium is... in case any threads are stripped, which does happen, as we all know, on sump plugs occasionally. If the sump plug is softer than the metal in the actual sump itself, in the engine block, if it's over tightened, It's the sump plug that will strip, and a sump plug is relatively easy and cheap to replace, whereas sorting a stripped thread out on the actual engine block itself is a much bigger, more involved and expensive job. Most manufacturers just stick a cheap steel sump plug in and, you know, leave the responsibility to the owner. So it's nice to see that BSA have put some thought into this and thought about the implications later on in the bike's life if something goes wrong. I like that. Now, I don't know why this particular plug was so tight. You know, it was certainly well over the 20 Newton meters quoted in the manual. Either someone over-tightened it, or it has something to do with the way the two grades of metal have interacted as the engine has been heated up and cooled down, you know, in the first stages of the bike. I have come across this before. The result of this was that I did chew the hex up a little bit on the actual sump plug itself. It's still perfectly serviceable, but not ideal. What I'll do, ready for the next oil change, is I'll get a replacement, and hopefully we won't have any problems with it being over tight in the future. My apologies for the camera angle. You know, this was the best I could get, but at least, you know, with that light behind the oil as it was coming out, you could see it was very clean oil. So really pleased with the progress of the running in of this bike so far. Right, still no sound from the microphone, I'm sorry about this. Now, the kit that I used for this first service is from Hitchcock's. Hitchcock's are really good at this. They do this for all the Royal Enfield models. A premium service kit that includes absolutely everything you're likely to need for an oil change, including enough oil. In this case, it's Silcolene's Pro XP full synthetic oil, which I personally believe is the best on the market. I've been using this stuff in its various different versions for about 3 decades. It's an ester-based engine lubricant which far exceeds the recommended lubricants that BSA recommend. Now, this kit also includes a genuine BSA oil filter and 2 replacement O-rings for the oil filter carrier, as well as your 2 sealing washers for your sump and your oil tank plug. Obviously, this particular kit is especially for the BSA 650 Gold Star. Now, BSA recommend that you only really need to change the seals and the O-rings every 2 oil changes, but I changed them anyway on this occasion. Ordinarily, I always prefer to replace sealing washers. O-rings, not so much. Generally, if they look like they're in decent condition, they can be reused several times, but as I say, I changed them all on this occasion anyway. Now, pre-soaking your oil filter, I mean, to be honest, I'm not 100% sure whether this is necessary or not. The thinking behind this is that the paper elements in these oil filters take a few seconds to wet in before they will actually allow oil to pass through them. So by wetting the fibres in the oil filter prior to fitting it, that puts it in a condition where it will allow oil to pass through it immediately without any delay and possible starvation of oil to the engine. Now, in reality, you know, if you've ever sort of dismantled parts of an engine, there's plenty of oil sort of coated on all the moving parts inside. Certainly enough that the engine is going to be fine running for 30, 40, maybe even 60 seconds without any oil in it, especially if it's cold. So I'm not really sure it's 100% necessary, but I did it anyway on this occasion. Still no sound. As I say, my microphone must have switched off, and the problem is it's a radio mic, so the receiver is plugged into the camera, which automatically disconnects the camera mic, so there's no sound whatsoever. Sorry about that. Access to the oil filter is gained by removing this engine casing on the right hand side of the bike. Altogether, we've got 4 short bolts at the bottom and 3 longer bolts at the top. Now, although this engine casing does have a gasket on it, it's not actually responsible for keeping oil in, as you'll see in a moment. Its main function, as well as being decorative, is mainly just to hold the actual filter carrier in to stop it from being pushed out while the engine's running. And it's actually the two O-rings on the carrier that keep the engine oil within the engine, so that it can't escape and sort of, flood this aperture that you're looking at now. Now, you'll notice that on the rear surface of the actual filter carrier, there's an arrow pointing upwards. It is important that you keep this arrow pointing upwards both during removal and refitting your filter. And that's because the actual carrier only has 3 points of connection to hold the filter in place. If you switch it round the other way, the filter will just fall out. The manual tells you just to pull the filter out, and there is a sort of handle there, as you can see, to facilitate that. But this is an extremely tight interference fit because of the presence of those two large O-rings. Obviously, if it was easy to pull out, it would be easy for oil to get past those O-rings, which isn't a good scenario. So it is extremely difficult to pull out. And I will say right now, it's correspondingly just as difficult to get it back in, but you will get there, just be patient with it. Now, what I decided on in the end, it could be that there is a tool specifically designed for withdrawing this housing, but obviously I don't have it, but there's an easy way of getting around it. Take that gasket off and put it somewhere safe, and then get a large flat-bladed screwdriver, then using some cloth or rag or something like that to protect the mating surfaces where the engine cover fastens onto the engine, because you don't want to be marring those. Just gently lever the housing out, and it does come out pretty easy when you've got a little bit of leverage on it. Now, the mistake I made here is, as I withdrew the carrier, I twisted it around and the filter dropped out, and I did have difficulty retrieving it. So keep that arrow pointing upwards as you remove it. That's what it's for. There will be quite a lot of old engine oil in this aperture, so take some time to soak that up and get rid of it. You don't want to be mixing that back in with the new oil if you can help it. The object of an oil change is obviously to get rid of much of the old oil as you possibly can. Now, getting the new oil filter in, I did have some difficulty with that. It took me about 5 minutes to get it seated properly, and when I compared the old filter with the new filter, bearing in mind they're both genuine BSA accessories or parts, there was a slight difference in size between the two. The new filter was ever so slightly wider and longer. It was still within specification, obviously, because I did get it in the end, but it did, the tolerances are very tight in there, and it did cause me a bit of hassle sort of jiggling it about and eventually getting it lined up so that it would go in. You've got a situation in the housing where initially it's quite wide to accommodate the carrier and the seals, and then it steps down to a slightly narrower aperture for the actual filter itself. And I think what was happening is that the filter was snagging on the shoulder where it stepped down, which was causing me problems getting it in, but I got there in the end. Once you've got it all lined up, the big issue is there's so much friction between those two O-rings and the housing that they fit into. They're very difficult to push in. They've got to be, because if they didn't, obviously oil would escape around them. So what I would advise you to do is just get a little bit of fresh engine oil and just lubricate those O-rings before trying to insert them. It does make it a little bit easier, but there is quite a lot of force required to get that housing far enough in so that it seats properly. So once you've done that, you can go ahead and refit the engine casing. If you don't have it far enough in, you won't get the engine casing on. The main sort of job that I can see for this engine casing is to actually hold that handle in so that pressure can't push the actual filter out and allow oil to escape. So it's a pretty good system, a little bit convoluted in my opinion, but it seems to do the job well, and it's very secure, which is the most important thing. Now, by the time you've done this, every last drop of oil that can possibly come out of that engine should have come out by now, and it's time to just clean up the areas around the sump and the bottom of the oil tank, because you don't want drips that might fall down later on and make you think you've got a leak, and don't ask me how I know that. So make sure that the bottom of your oil tank and the bottom of the sump is oil free with no drips coming out anywhere, and you can put your new sealing washers onto your sump plug and your oil tank plug and then refit them. The torque settings for these two plugs are in the manual. What I like to do after I've fitted them is just clean up the area again with a sort of solvent based chain cleaner, just to get rid of every sort of smear and drop of oil, to make sure that it's totally oil free, so that you can, check with confidence later on to ascertain whether there are any leaks after you've finished the fitting of the parts. Now, one thing I should mention, access to this sump plug is quite difficult. I mean, it's not impossible, but it is quite awkward. BSA recommend that you get the bike upright and on a paddock stand to perform your oil change. Now, yeah, I can see why they've sort of advising to do it that way, because it will make access easier. But I discovered there's an advantage to doing it on the side stand. One is you don't get so much oil all over your frame, which you definitely will do if if the bike's upright. And I didn't realise this at the time, because I discovered that I had to put a lot more oil into this bike than the manual says you should, to the tune of about 300 millilitres, which is quite a lot. Now, if the back of the bike is up in the air on a paddock stand, it's going to tip the bike forward. And it seems to me that by having the bike level like this, you get about 290 to 300 millilitres more of the old oil out of the bike. And the more of the old oil you can get out, the better. I mean, at the end of the day, 300 millilitres is a glass tumbler full of oil. That's quite a lot of oil. So when you've got the sump plug back in, replace the oil drain plug for the oil tank. And when you've done that, it's time to start refilling with oil. Right, refilling with oil. Now, the manual says that on a routine oil and filter service, the bike will take 2.3 litres of oil. The instructions tell you to put 2 litres of fresh oil in first, start the engine up and let it run the oil up for 2 to 3 minutes, I think it is. It might be 3 to 5 minutes. Then switch the engine off and leave it a few minutes for the oil level to settle down and take a reading. Now, when I did that, it was nowhere near the dipstick, so the instructions then tell you to put a further 300 millilitres in. Now, I followed those instructions. I restarted the engine, ran it up, stopped it, let it settle down. On both occasions, the oil pressure light went out immediately, so there was enough oil in there to for the bike to run. But it then required an additional round about 290 millilitres of oil to actually get it 3/4 of the way up from between the minimum and maximum range on the dipstick. So it's obvious that doing it the way I did it here got rid of a lot more of the old engine oil than it does doing it in the way that BSA prescribes. Now, I'm not saying their way is wrong. Obviously, they're thinking of safety and they're thinking of ease of access to the sump plug. But for a little bit of hassle getting to the sump plug, I found this actually more rewarding and I got a more complete oil change. Now, what I wouldn't advise is that if you do it the way that I did it, you automatically stick 2.6 litres of oil in. These situations are really variable. I've done oil changes on the same bike over the years and found, some years when I do an oil change, I'll get more in it than I do other years. It's one of life's great mysteries where engines are concerned. Oil seems to lack in some hidden corner of the engine somewhere. You fill it up, you put more in than you think you need to, but you're still only getting, the level that you're looking for. You take it for a ride, bring it back and find that you've overfilled it, and that's not a scenario that you really want to be coping with. Although I will say, with the remote reservoir on the BSA Gold Star, I reckon if you did overfill it, it would be very easy to siphon the surplus oil out of that tank if you need to. You've got direct access to it, and there are no mechanics in the way stopping you from getting a tube in to siphon some out. So don't automatically assume that you will definitely get 2.6 litres in it if you do it this way. You know, follow the instructions basically in the manual, and then take it from there in little gradients of like 50ml or 100ml, something like that, to ensure that you don't overfill it. Now, after filming this video, I took the bike out and I did a total of 40 miles. I checked the oil when I got back home. Well, initially I did a 10-mile run just to check that everything was okay. Then I did another 30 miles. With the engine absolutely up to temperature, as luck would have it, the oil level sits exactly on the maximum mark. So, yeah, happy with that. Now, you can tell a lot about a new engine at its first service and oil change. Both, you know, the quality of the design and the quality of manufacture. Now, we shouldn't have any nasty surprises because we know this is a Rotax engine. During the course of the first 550 miles, the bike has burned 0 oil. The oil level was exactly the same just before I did the oil change on this bike as it was when I received it. The oil has maintained a good colour, as you saw from the video. You know, it's still nice golden brown. It had discoloured very, very slightly, which is to be expected. Now, usually the first fill at the factory is a low-grade oil because the whole sort of premise of breaking an engine in is that initially you want rapid wear to take place. Now, I'm not saying that you know the oil's no good, but it's usually a cheaper, low quality because they know it's going to be dumped very quickly and nice oil putting in its place. And they actually want engine wear, premature engine wear, to take place in the early stages. That's required for the purposes of a good break-in. Now, the residue that was stuck to the magnets was exactly what I'd hoped to see. A very fine dust-like accumulation of sort of microscopic magnetic particles, and, you know, certainly nothing of any measurable size coming out of it. That's a sign of a healthy break-in, you know, no nasties to report at all. Now, big singles can be a bit rough in the first sort of 20 miles. I've got to say, I never experienced that with the Gold Star. It was certainly better than the last big single BMW that I broke in. The bike started off smooth and just progressively got smoother. Now, one thing I did notice is that as time went on, by about 400 miles, engine braking had greatly increased, so I take that as a sign that the piston rings have seated in and sealed well. Engine braking is phenomenal on this bike. Now, this is not a criticism of the classic 350, please don't take this the wrong way, but what I have noticed is that, you know, for the size of the engine in this and the fact that it is a single, it is far smoother than the classic 350. Now, the other thing that I'd like to mention is the gearbox. On the press bike, I reported that it was a really good gearbox, certainly on par with the gearboxes that Royal Enfield are turning out. What did surprise me with this bike is I have not had one single glitch with the gearbox from the day I received it. Now, normally when you're breaking a bike in, you can expect the gearbox to get a little bit confused and tongue-tied occasionally. You know, it shouldn't be a constant problem, but every now and again, you know, maybe once every 100 miles or so, you'll find you're crashing down through the box as you come through down to a junction or something like that, and it can get a bit snarled up. But I've had nothing like that. It has been absolutely 100% faultless, not one false neutral, nothing. This gearbox has behaved perfectly. Now, fuel consumption, I've been sort of keeping a mental note of fuel consumption from getting the bike. Initially, I was getting about 62 miles to the gallon, and that's improved with each progressive tank full of fuel. Now, the last time I filled it up, which was on Sunday, I think, I recorded the amount of fuel that I put in, and when I did the calculations, I got just over 70 miles to the gallon. This is all mostly with a pillion on, and I am anticipating that that may improve even more with time. Now, I've had a lot of comments saying that the quality of this engine isn't going to be up to much, or, you know, the bike's not going to be any good. I can assure you, everything that I've seen here indicates to me that this engine is among the best in terms of technology and quality. That there is nothing wrong with this engine. It's going to be good for many, many, many years of service. Now, I don't know whether it's psychological or not, but I often experience this, and I think other people do as well. Once I'd done this oil change, the bike felt much smoother, much more responsive. The gearbox, which was already good, felt even better. Right, I'm going to call it a day now. Once again, thank you so much for taking the time to watch this and my other videos, and in doing so, helping to support this channel. I really do appreciate it. I'll leave a link to the premium oil change kit on Hitchcock's website, and as I say, they do these kits for all the Royal Enfield bikes as well. Please leave a like and subscribe to the channel if you're not already a subscriber. There are other ways that you can help me out as well, via the Patreon page or the Super Thanks button down below. They're there as a sort of tipping jar. You know, if you like the content and you think it's worth it, leave a tip. If you don't, there's no pressure, don't. But it does help me out. I will, as always, be back next week, so until then, please ride safely, and I'll see you soon.